You remember the exact weight of your first bribe because you almost dropped it. $73,000 in a shoebox, delivered by a bailiff who'd worked your courtroom for 20 years. He didn't say anything. Neither did you. You just took the box into chambers, locked the door, and sat with it on your lap for 40 minutes. The money smelled like cedar and something else, maybe fear, maybe opportunity. You told yourself you'd return it, you'd call the FBI, you'd do the right thing after you finished this one case. That was 11 years ago. Nobody wakes up corrupt. You woke up at 4 a.m. to review discovery, same as always. Your back hurt from the cheap judicial chair the county provided. Your wife had left the year before, taking the kids to her mother's, citing emotional absence. You understood. You were absent. The law required everything, and you gave it everything until there was nothing left for anyone else. The case that broke you wasn't even interesting. Insurance fraud, some contractor padding invoices after a hurricane, but his lawyer was interesting. Persistent, he scheduled a procedural conference that somehow became dinner. He talked about your reputation for fairness. He mentioned your daughter's private school tuition. He knew the amount down to the dollar. You don't have to do anything wrong, he said, cutting his steak. Just thorough. The defense has a motion to compel. Most judges deny it. Costs the plaintiff another 6 months, another 50 grand in legal fees. They settle. Everyone moves on. You denied the motion. The case settled. The shoebox appeared 3 days later. The first year, you vomited regularly, not from guilt, from adrenaline. Every ruling you influenced felt like stepping onto a frozen lake, waiting for the crack. But the crack never came. The system was too busy, too understaffed, too trusting. You learned that judges are monitored less than cashiers at grocery stores. You learned that judicial discretion is a phrase that means whatever you need it to mean. You developed rules, no violent criminals at first, no cases involving children, nothing that would make headlines. You told yourself these boundaries made you ethical. You were still serving justice, just adjusting its speed. By year 3, your boundaries moved. A drug case here, a domestic dispute there, the money got better, and your justifications got more sophisticated. You weren't taking bribes, you were participating in an alternative economy. You were correcting market inefficiencies in the legal system. You read an article about judicial burnout and recognized yourself in every paragraph. The system failed judges, so judges failed the system. Symmetry. By year 6, you weren't taking money directly anymore. That was amateur. You had a foundation now, the Center for Judicial Innovation. It hosted conferences in places with beaches. It published a journal nobody read. It paid you a salary larger than your judicial one for editorial oversight. Lawyers didn't bribe you. They sponsored your conferences. They endowed your research initiatives. They contributed to your re-election campaign, though you ran unopposed. The money flowed through so many legitimate channels that you sometimes forgot where it started. You built a house on a lake. You sent your daughter to college without loans. You dated someone who didn't know what you did, who liked you for your stability. The cases got bigger. A developer needed environmental permits approved. A pharmaceutical company needed liability limits. A politician needed a DUI to disappear. You handled each with professional detachment. You weren't responsible for what these people did outside your courtroom. You were just facilitating outcomes. Sarah Chen was 32 years old and still believed in things. You could see it in how she organized her files, how she addressed you as your honor without the subtle irony most prosecutors developed. She was building something big, a RICO case against the developer you'd helped 3 years prior. The one whose marina project had buried toxic waste instead of removing it. Children were getting sick. The EPA was involved. She noticed the pattern. 17 cases, all involving the same defense firm, all dismissed or settled favorably, all presided over by you. She filed a complaint with the Commission on Judicial Conduct, confidential, preliminary, no public disclosure yet, but you received the notification. You sat in your chambers after hours, holding the paper, feeling something you hadn't felt in years, genuine fear. Not of prison. Prison was abstract, unlikely, manageable. You feared exposure, the look on your daughter's face, the headlines. The end of the person you'd constructed, the stable, successful, respected man who'd replaced the exhausted idealist you'd been. You didn't sleep for 3 days. Then you called someone, not the developer, too direct, too traceable. You called a lawyer who represented people who handled problems without paperwork. You didn't specify what you wanted. You just shared information, Chen's schedule, her route home, the fact that she'd been working late, alone, in a parking garage with broken security cameras. 2 weeks later, Chen was attacked. Not killed, just hurt. Badly enough to take medical leave. Badly enough to stall the investigation. The RICO case died without her. The developer sent flowers to your chambers, white lilies, no card. You told yourself you hadn't ordered anything, you hadn't paid for anything, you just created conditions. The distinction felt important. It felt like the difference between murder and manslaughter, between intent and negligence. You clung to it. By year 10, you controlled an entire circuit. Other judges came to you for guidance. You taught them the system, not explicitly, never directly. You modeled behavior. You demonstrated possibilities. 3 of your former clerks now sat on appellate benches. They remembered who recommended them. You'd evolved beyond simple case fixing. Your Center for Judicial Innovation had expanded into restorative justice programs, alternatives to incarceration that generated fees, that channeled offenders into treatment facilities you had financial interests in. You weren't soft on crime. You were monetizing it efficiently, legally on paper. The public loved you. You wrote op-eds about mass incarceration. You gave TED Talks about reimagining justice. It started with the cryptocurrency. You'd created it yourself, LexCoin, for legal service payments, completely untraceable theoretically. But the FBI had been watching the exchanges. They didn't know it was yours yet. They just knew someone was laundering judicial bribes through blockchain, and the amounts were growing. They started with your foundation, subpoenas for financial records, interviews with former employees. You felt it coming? The way animals feel earthquakes. You began preparing your exit. You scheduled a meeting with the U.S. attorney yourself, not defensive, offensive. You walked in with a proposal. I can give you the Marinello crime family, you said. Complete structure, financial flows, murder locations. I've been collecting information for years, waiting for the right moment. This was partially true. You had collected information, not for justice, for leverage. The Marinellos were your largest clients. Using your courtroom to eliminate competition through strategic convictions, you knew everything, and you knew the U.S. Attorney had been trying to build a case for 8 years. In exchange, you wanted immunity, witness protection, a new identity. The U.S. attorney laughed, then stopped laughing when you slid a file across his desk. Locations, dates, bodies. But here's what the U.S. attorney didn't know. You didn't actually have proof of half what you claimed. You had enough to make him think you did, to start an investigation, to create leverage. While he verified you were negotiating with the Marinellos, telling them the U.S. attorney was coming, offering to make it disappear. For a price, for control, for your own private island and a bank account in a country with no extradition treaty. You were playing both sides against a middle that didn't exist yet. You weren't a witness. You were a catalyst. The chaos you created was your retirement plan. It almost worked, almost. The Marinellos paid $2 million in bearer bonds delivered to a storage unit you'd rented under a dead man's name, the U.S. Attorney started his investigation, diverting resources from your financial review. You booked flights. You prepared documents. You were 72 hours from disappearance. Then the Marinellos made a mistake. They tried to kill the U.S. attorney. Amateur, panicked, traceable. They failed, and in failing, they connected everything. The investigation into them led back to you. The investigation into you led to everything else. The Sarah Chen's assault, solved now, with evidence you hadn't known existed. They arrested you in your chambers. You were reviewing a motion to suppress when the FBI walked in. You didn't resist. You'd rehearsed this moment, prepared for it, but still felt surprised. The robe felt heavy for the first time. 11 years of weight, suddenly present. You represented yourself. What else could you do? No lawyer would touch you, and you trusted yourself more than anyone anyway. The prosecution's case was comprehensive. They had your financial records, your communications, testimony from other judges you'd corrupted, trading their cooperation for reduced sentences. They had the Marinello accountant who'd kept parallel books. They had everything. They gave you life plus 30 years. The judge who sentenced you had been your protege once. Prison was different than you expected. Not the violence. You'd prepared for that. The boredom, the removal of choice, every minute scheduled, monitored, controlled. You thought about your daughter often. She never visited. She was gone. The person you'd constructed, the stable, successful, respected man, had never really existed. Only the exhausted idealist remained, older now, sicker, serving time for crimes he'd committed, trying to escape himself. You died in prison 14 years later, heart attack, sudden, alone in your cell. The obituaries were brief. Disgraced former judge. No mention of the lake house, the foundation, the TED Talks. The moment you looked at that shoebox and thought, I deserve this. The system owes me. Everyone does it. You broke the promise, not for survival, for comfort.